Hello everybody, my name's Alan Underwood with codingblocks.net, and in this video I'm going to be doing a full review of the Zergotech Freedom ergonomic keyboard. Before I jump into the actual review of this, I do want to let you know up front that Zergotech contacted me after I had done the video saying that I was going to do a bunch of different keyboard reviews and asked if I would mind reviewing their keyboard. So just know that they sent this to me free of charge. I did not pay for this keyboard, but this review is absolutely 100% my own. It's not biased based off the fact that they sent it to me. I actually spoke with them before I got the keyboard and said, hey, only send this thing if you're cool with me doing an honest review. And they were very confident in their product and said, yes, absolutely, we'll send it to you. Please give your honest feedback. So just know that up front. Now, like I did with the Kinesis Advantage 2, and I plan on doing with the Moonlander and everything else, I'm going to give you my overall thoughts up front, and then I will dive into the details afterwards. So this keyboard retails for $339 US. It is actually made in Australia. Really cool that it came from across the pond over there. So is it worth $339, right? So the Kinesis Advantage 2 is in that same ballpark. The Moonlander that I'll be reviewing next is also in that same ballpark. Has this thing earned its way into the $340 range? And I'll say, yeah, it has. It's actually a really, really good keyboard. Now, there are a couple of things, being a developer, that I have a few issues with, and I'll get into it, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. And really, they've got a very unique design here and a fun and a very functional keyboard. So that said, yes, it is worth the $339. That does ship with the thin profile sliders that go under your wrist. So with that, you kind of get the whole package here. And then if you wanted to buy these stationary wrist pads, you can get those also. I think it's an extra $39. Whether or not you want to do that or not, I'll leave that up to you. Hopefully you'll find out here in just a minute whether or not it's your thing or not. I ended up requesting the Mac layout because I'm on my Mac most of the time. I probably am on Windows 20% of the time and Mac 80% of the time. So I wanted to get that layout so that I'd have a really good feel for what that is. And additionally, I got the Kaihl White box switches. Those are the clickier ones, the louder ones, more tactile feedback. And I gotta say, they're really good. They feel great. Now, they are very loud. So anytime I've ever had my wife or anybody else in this room while I've been typing, I get looks, because they have some sound on them. So they're similar to the Cherry MX, I think Blues is probably what they're similar to. But that said, the feel of them is excellent. They have a nice tactile pushback on them. One thing that's interesting is Zergotech did ship this with some rubber. I don't know why I cannot think of the name of these right now, probably because I'm sick, but they're just rings that you can pull the keys off. They gave you a key puller, pull the keys off, and on the underside of the key, they've actually got little, they've got posts that you can put those rings on, and then you can attach them back to the keyboard, and they will actually reduce a little bit of the loudness of the keys. It basically gives them a softer hit whenever the key completely bottoms out. So I'd say that it reduces the noise by maybe 20%. It's not a ton, but it's enough to actually bring it down. So flip that over. I don't think it's still good enough for if you're in a shared environment, but it is a nice feature if you wanted to be able to add those on there. Now, that said, there's a lot of those rings and there's a lot of those keys. So doing that will take some time. I guess probably about 15-20 minutes. It's really easy to pull the keys off, so not that big of a deal. Now, let's talk about the main feature of this keyboard, and it's this bay at the bottom of the keyboard. And inside these bays, are glass panes, and really what it's for is to be able to take these sliders and you drop them on there and they're just buttery smooth. It's surprising how well it works. So I've never even seen this before, but apparently it's a thing. Apparently people buy sliders to put on desks, and they'll put them in front of keyboards so that they can move their hands around like this. And also they'll put these in front of mice, which I'd never even heard of this. So it was all pretty interesting to me whenever Zergotech reached out to me. So that said, you drop this thing on these glass panels and they move perfectly. So you put your hands, your wrist, the base of your wrist right on those things, and you just start typing like this, and it's like you're flowing the whole time that you're doing this thing. So that is the primary feature of this. And honestly, when I first got it, I was like, man, what is this a gimmick? Honestly, it works out really well. And believe it or not, the part that was really interesting to me is it ends up being a lot of fun typing on the keyboard. Like there were many times that I would have music playing, and before I knew it, I'd be just moving my hands around because you can sort of dance there. It's like a dance floor for your wrist, right? So it's weird that it turns out that way, but it does work exceptionally well. So the tactile feedback, the wrist pads that slide around, all just that stuff works really well. Also worth noting is they have I think they call it like a partial ortho linear or orthodynamic. God, I can't remember again. At any rate, so what they did on this keyboard that's a little bit interesting compared to others is if you've heard of these ortho, man, now I gotta look it up. All right, I looked it up. So they have what they call a semi-orthogonal design. And what that means is the way that the keys are set up is they are mostly in columns. So if you have your hands on the home row, like the ASDF, JKL, semicolon, the keys going up from those are in a column. So your Q, your 1, your F1, those things are lined up perfectly straight from that. However, the bottom row, the Z, the X, the C, and all those are actually shifted over a little bit. So they're not in the same column format layout as the rest of the keys that are going up. And what they said is basically due to how your hands are shaped and all that, it's the attack angle of your fingers as you hit these different keys is why they left those offset at the bottom. And it's funny, I don't think I'd even noticed it before I went to do this review because I've been typing on this keyboard for about a month now. And I don't think I even noticed that those bottom keys were shifted and the other ones were linear. But it works out really well. Like naturally, my fingers went to the right spots on the keyboard and I don't really have any typos from that type of thing. So apparently they were onto something. Again, wasn't even anything I ever thought about. Now, some of the things that I want to point out, because I mentioned that there are a couple of things that keep me from just wholeheartedly saying yes as a developer to this. And the first one, and this is the biggest one for me, is there are no dedicated arrow keys. So in order to use the arrow keys on this keyboard, you have to use a modifier key, which is called the function shift button. So you can use the function shift either on your left or your right thumb. And there is a function lock as well that you can use that will make it to where you don't have to hold down a modifier key and you can use these arrows. The problem for me as a developer is I use those arrow keys all the time, right? Whether I'm in Visual Studio, whether I'm in Visual Studio Code, PyCharm, whatever, right? Like pick your IDE, you're always navigating with arrows, or at least I am quite a bit. And so having to hit a modifier key to do that is a little off-putting. I will say I got mostly used to it over the month. like I've gotten pretty decent to where my thumb knows where that function shift key is, and I can use those arrow keys because it's not WASD, it's J, K, L, and I are the arrow keys. And it works really well. Honestly, there is one feature of it that I really like on the Mac especially. So if you're used to being on a Windows machine and you use a Windows keyboard, you have page up, page down, home, and you have all the buttons that allow you to navigate a page of text pretty easily. On Mac, it's always annoyed me, but you have to use modifier keys over there to do anything. If you want to go to the end of a line, then you have to know whether or not it's Alt or Command and then the right arrow or whatever. Like you have to remember all these things. And some things just aren't natural or are not easy to do at all anyways in the Mac, especially as a developer. One thing I do like about this keyboard is when you use that function shift thing, they do have a home and an end. And so that comes in extremely handy on Mac because you could just do those and you get there. And at least it's not some memorized modifier of Alt and right or Command and right or whatever, right? It's a little bit easier when it says home and end. So that's nice, but again, just having to use the modifier keys to get to those arrows is like, man, as a developer, I really want to be able to do that stuff quicker and easier. So the other thing that is just a touch off-putting, and it's not a deal breaker, but just know that when you are, the keys are very tall. The bottom row of keys are very tall. And so for me, again, I think I mentioned in the last video, my hand from the base of my hand to the tip of my middle finger is right at 8 inches. And so for me, one of the things that is a little bit frustrating is to reach some of the keys, I have to basically pick my hand up off the pad. If I'm going to use my index finger or my pinky finger, I have to pick my hands up off the pad. Otherwise, I can't reach the keys. And when I do that, then the pads drop off to the edge. And now I've got to, you've got to rework, get your wrists in place and then slide them back up and all that, right? So as a developer, the problem is those keys that are sort of out of reach are keys that you use quite a bit. One being the back tick that's at the top right on the F11 button. Another one is the tilde key that is the F12 button. So as a developer, like if you're in JavaScript, the backtick is used for template literals or string interpolation or whatever. And that tilde key is also used in a decent number of operations that you might be doing if you're doing regexes or anything like that. So it's a shame that some of the reach is so far out there because otherwise it is an absolutely fantastic design. Now, that brings me to the next thing, and this is, let's get back into the positive of this keyboard. One of the things that I do like about this keyboard is the fact that you can remap keys. You can do macros, you can move keys, you can copy keys, you can do all kinds of things, and it's all done through the hardware on the keyboard, which again, I really like. I mentioned that in the Kinesis Advantage review. I like that on this too. The fact that you don't have to have software to make this thing do what you need it to do is amazing. Now, the one big one for me that I needed, especially for the Mac, is, again, I don't like to move my hands off the keyboard a ton to get to the mouse. So, like, for instance, if I have a bunch of Chrome windows open, on Mac, the way that you cycle through those windows is you do Command and then backtick, and then that will cycle through the open windows. On Windows, it's a little bit easier. You can just Alt-Tab, right? And those keys are right there. They're really easy to get to. Well, the problem is that backtick is up on the F11 button. And the other problem is that backtick requires that you hit a number shift modifier key to get to it. So now you have to hit Command, number shift modifier, and then reach all the way up there and hit that F11 button to cycle through the windows. Well, that for me, it was like really frustrating because it was way out of the way. And as I mentioned, as I moved my hand up there, then the slider dropped off. And so it was constantly redoing it. And that's a key combination I do quite a bit. So what I did is I remapped that key over to the top left delete key, which is just underneath the escape key. And that puts it very similar to where it exists on the actual Mac keyboard. And now I can just command and backtick and I'm good to go. So the ability to remap these keys is awesome. Now, I didn't move the key on the keyboard because that key is a different size than that delete key, so it wasn't going to fit there and look proper. But just the fact that you can remap that thing is awesome. And then if you ever forget what your mappings were and you need to start over, you can easily hold down some modifier keys, reset the entire keyboard layout, and life is good. Now, that's one thing that is interesting. I'm going to show it here in the video. Is it wasn't clear to me on their website how you do some of these macros and key remappings and all that. Basically, what you want to do is you want to open up like a notepad or a text edit if you're on Mac, and then you're going to hold down the modifier keys. So like num shift, function shift, and then if you hold down the top left delete key for like 5 seconds, it will spit out some text in your text editor and basically prompt you what you're supposed to do next. Like, so if I'm trying to reset the keyboard, num shift, function shift, hold down the delete button. And then after it spits out the text, then it'll say, hey, push F1 if you want to reset the keyboard, or hit F3 if you want to switch the OS that you're trying to use. So it does give you some textual feedback, which is nice, but it wasn't obvious to me that I needed to open up an editor to be able to see some of that stuff, because the way that I was doing it is I'd done it while I was on the web page, and the web page is jumping around and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So just know you need some text thing open. But yeah, it works amazingly well. And with that, I basically got rid of the outside of the arrow keys. I got rid of the one major downfall, which was that stretch for that key, and it works perfect. So now that brings me to the next thing that is really interesting about this keyboard. And I think when I first saw it, I thought it was going to be a gimmick. But I'm happy to report that this particular feature is actually done really well. So what I'm talking about is this keyboard has 3 different layers. There's the default layer, there's the keypad layer, and then there's this mouse layer. The mouse layer is really interesting. So if you are somebody that really doesn't want to take your hand off the keyboard and put it on a mouse, and maybe you have pains from dealing with mice, which I have, that's why I have a vertical mouse, you can use this keyboard and not even have a mouse. So it's really interesting. What you do is you hit this button that's just above the space bar on the right thumb, and it's the mouse button. You have to enable it. There's some sort of key combination to do it. But after you do, you can hit that. And now those same arrow keys that you use on your right hand are the same keys that are used to move the mouse around the screen. And shockingly, it works incredibly well. So first, the speed when you're using the arrow keys is already pretty good. But what's really good is on your left hand, there are keys to modify the speed at which the thing moves. So you can have it accelerate to go even faster. You can have it like just chug on the gas and move really fast. I think it's actually called gas. And then there's another one where you can hit the brakes. So if you've got your cursor screaming across the screen because you're going across 43 inches of monitor, right? You can have it speed up while you're trying to get across to the other side. And then as soon as you start approaching, you can hit another button and it'll slow it down so that so that you get that mouse cursor right where you need it to be. And then on top of that, once you want to left click on one of these things, you just tap your thumb on that space bar on that left, on the enter button on the left, and it clicks the button. And honestly, it works so well. I wish that I could say that I used it the entire time, just naturally switching back and forth. I would have to remind myself, because obviously I've been using a mouse for so many years that, I'm just used to pulling my hand off and doing something and coming back. But when I'd remember to do it, it was actually a pleasant experience. Like I could easily navigate things that I needed to. On top of that, you can also scroll the page up and down, and the same acceleration and braking also works for scrolling a web page or any other application. So if you're scrolling up, you can tap the brakes and it'll start slowing the scroll. And if you want to hurry up and get to the bottom of some huge chunk of text, you can hit the gas pedal. So again, that feature was done so much better than what I anticipated. And it's actually something worth using on this keyboard if you have problems, especially with your wrist or your arms when you're having to move over and swing your arms around doing the mice. So that works really well. So, I mean, honestly, overall, I was very impressed with the keyboard. Oh, some other features that are worth talking about. On the bottom of it, there are 4 switches on each side of the keyboard so that you can change the tilting or the tinting and the tilt. So you can actually have it inverted. You can have it raised that way. You can tilt it that way. You can also tilt it out the other way. So, up to you exactly what feels the most comfortable. This keyboard will allow you to lay it out. The build quality of the keyboard is fantastic. Like, I've had absolutely no issues with it. Again, I've been using it pretty steady for over a month and been very happy with the keyboard. And then that brings me to the next thing. So the slider pads, they really are excellent. Like, it's just a fun experience to type on them. But they also, I asked that they do ship I did ask them to ship the stationary pads as well. And here's the interesting thing. The pads that they shipped are high quality. Unfortunately, the ones they gave me were just slightly oversized, but they're very comfortable, like super comfortable. If you put them on there and you want to use it just like a regular keyboard with a nice wrist pad on it, it works excellent. Like, they're comfortable, they're padded well, never had an issue with them. There is a side benefit to using those as opposed to the sliders. So no, they're not as fun. But when I mentioned that whole thing about where you have to reach up to the top row of keys and the sliders drop off and you have to reposition your hands and get them back in, you don't have that issue with the fixed pads. So it's a shame because you're taking away from some of the fun and some of the design that makes this thing special. But on the flip side, it actually is a really good typing experience if you have those stationary pads. With the stationary pads, I actually do eke out a few more words a minute than I do with the slider rounds. So I'm assuming with the slider rounds, I'm just not quite as fast, simply because you're moving your hands around a lot more. I want to say that I was averaging around 88 words a minute with the sliders, and I was hitting about 94 with the fixed pads, which kind of makes sense because when you have your hands in a fixed place, it's just easier to not make those mental mistakes because you're not moving around as much. But either way, my accuracy on both is pretty good, and I wouldn't say it was a major loss either which way. So the sliders are just fine. They're fun. The fixed ones work great too. So all that said, again, I think it's an excellent piece of gear that these guys have put together. I think it's awesome that they've come up with this design. They've built a lot of features into this keyboard. If anything, I would just wish that they would shrink that bottom row of keys so that you can reach more or reach the entire keyboard, without having to stretch or move your hands up off those sliders. But outside of that and the arrow keys, like, this is just a fantastic piece of gear. So if you are in the market for an ergonomic keyboard and you want something that's a little bit different, something that's pretty fun and they've just put together a nice kit, then I would definitely check this thing out. And I want to thank Zergotech for sending this out to me. We had hoped to get this review out sooner, but apparently due to shipping times and stuff, it just wasn't in the cards. But again, just a great piece of gear. So if you have any questions at all, please do feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer whatever I possibly can. And yeah, definitely go check them out. I'll have a link in the description to Zergotech down there. And I'll have more reviews coming up soon. The next one up is the Moonlander, which I'm sure Outlaw is excited about me getting to because I've been holding on to that thing for about 2 months while I've been getting these other reviews together. So yeah, if you're looking forward to more reviews on these ergonomic keyboards, definitely subscribe to the channel. If you want to be notified when the new one comes out, hit that bell down there. And yeah, if you're into development, software development, and you just want to hear a bunch about what's going on, maybe best practices or whatever, go to our website at codingblocks.net and check that out. And hopefully you enjoyed this, and I will be back soon with another review. So thanks for hanging out. Bye.